Welcome, everyone, to this special bonus episode of Daily Dose of Aramaic. As many of you know, we have just finished the biblical corpus of Aramaic. It's taken more than 500 episodes, more than 2 years, but look, it's amazing. Here we are. And it's not time today to talk about what we're going to do next, but it is time to welcome a special guest to Daily Dose of Aramaic to help us celebrate this wonderful occasion. Dr. Edward Cook is Ordinary Professor of Semitic Languages in the Department of Semitic and Egyptian Languages and Literatures at the Catholic University of America. He's a specialist in Biblical Hebrew and in Ancient Aramaic, particularly the Aramaic of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Targums. Dr. Cook's most recent publications are Biblical Aramaic and Related Dialects, an Introduction, the Dictionary of Kuman Aramaic, and the volume on the Book of Numbers for the Antioch Bible Project, which is an English translation of the Peshitta from Syriac. He's also the author of a glossary of Targum Onkelos and co-author with Michael Wise and Martin Abegg of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a new translation. He's on the editorial board of the Catholic University Press and is assistant managing editor of Old Testament Abstracts. His principal areas of research at present are in the semantics of Biblical Hebrew and in the Semitic background of the New Testament, which means that he's not only an ideal guest for the Daily Dose of Aramaic podcast, but also it's a wonderful honor to speak with him today. So welcome, Dr. Cook, to Daily Dose of Aramaic.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Could you share with our viewers what led you to become an academic in the field of biblical studies?
Well, many years ago, I showed up on the campus of Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California, with a vague idea that I would go into ministry of some kind. And 3 years later, I exited, having gained a compelling interest in biblical languages, especially Hebrew. So, occupational hazard. If you go to seminary, you could wind up getting more interested in the languages than anything else. So that's what happened to me, and I followed that up with a course of study at UCLA under Professor Stanislav Sagert, and both he and my former professors at Fuller, Bill Lesor and Fred Bush, were particularly adept and interested in Aramaic, and so I picked that up from them and added Aramaic to the usual curriculum of Hebrew and Greek, and completed a PhD course of study in focusing on Aramaic.
Some really wonderful common threads there in your story about becoming an academic in biblical studies from what we've heard from many of other of our guests. So that's wonderful. Well, could you share then a brief sketch of your academic career, especially highlighting the parts that you've already started to bring up that have involved teaching and writing about the biblical languages?
Well, as I say, I completed a PhD at UCLA in 1986, and after that, did the usual look the search for work, and wound up serving as a research scholar at the Comprehensive Aramaic Lexicon Project at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I spent over a decade in that activity, and so a lot of my interests proceed from the lexical study of Aramaic. So I wrote a couple of dictionaries, as you mentioned. So the glossary of Targum Onkelos, the Dictionary of Qumran Aramaic, which I began at least conceptually, when I was at Hebrew Union College working on the Aramaic lexicon project, I was one of the things I was in charge of was uh, putting into the database all the new Dead Sea Scrolls material that started to come out in the early '90s.
Mm.
A lot of which was Aramaic, and it was fascinating stuff. So I spent a lot of time uh, working on that material, and some specialized studies came out of that, and eventually the dictionary of Qumran Aramaic and some other works. And I also followed up while on the lexicon project. I followed up on my interest in Targum, which my doctoral dissertation was on one of the Aramaic Targumim, and so I continued to work in that area with some few publications, including eventually the glossary of Targum Onkelos, and finally, just most recently, put together some of the other teaching materials that I had used in the past to make this grammar of biblical Aramaic. So anyway, to go back to HUC after that came to an end, I applied for and became associate professor of Semitic languages at Catholic University, and then eventually ordinary professor. So, which is Catholic University speak for full professor. So at this point, I'm in what other people would call a full professor of Semitic languages at Catholic University. So, and most of the classes that I teach are either Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, or Aramaic, all its different dialects. And this semester, I'm also teaching a seminar on Semitic background of the New Testament, so which is a particular interest of mine, as you mentioned. So, in a nutshell, that's the course of my study.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions actually about some of the things you brought up there. So your doctoral dissertation, going all the way back to UCLA, the title is Rewriting the Bible, the Text and Language of the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum. Now that required, just taking a look at it before we talked here, it required a comprehensive evaluation of the Aramaic of that Targum, and then that entailed literary and linguistic comparison with the other Targums. So could you share some of your research findings with our viewers and how your doctoral research then paved your way for your later work?
Right. So I took my interest in Aramaic, and with the advice of Professor Sager, I started focusing on the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum, which was at the time, at least, had not been really studied in any depth as far as its language was concerned. So I decided that one approach would be just to make a comprehensive description of its language, because in the past, the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum had just been considered a mishmash of other Targumim, and that there was no particular unity or linguistic interest in it. And so when I started diving into that, I could see what made people say that, because there are elements of different dialects, different Aramaic dialects within Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. But I wound up thinking that in the end, there was a unity to the way that the Targum used the Aramaic language in its morphology and its syntax, and especially in its vocabulary, that there's a great deal of consistency in the way that it approached the rendering of the Hebrew text. And so I wound up proposing that, in fact, there was a particular literary kind of Aramaic, a literary dialect that was being used and it wasn't just a mishmash of different dialects. So,
Mm.
and after finishing that, I spoke to Professor Kaufman, Steve Kaufman at HUC, and discovered that he had come to very similar conclusions. And so the two of us together for the Aramaic Lexicon project proposed a complete dialect category called Late Jewish Literary Aramaic, in which includes the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum and some of the Targums to the writings, Psalms and Job and Targum Chronicles all seem to be written in this eclectic but consistent dialect.
Mm. So nothing that people necessarily would have spoken. It's for writing.
Right, right. I'm still not. I'm still not entirely sure myself whether there was any living dialect behind this. I suspect not, but it wasn't. It wasn't just a clumsy imitation either. They had, as I say, they had some idea of what kind of Aramaic they wanted to use. They didn't just randomly take from this or that dialect. So there was some kind of consistency. So the Zitz and Laban of that particular dialect is still unclear, but that it did have some setting, some particular setting with a particular school, I think is what's indicated.
And that consistency that you mentioned, that's why it's possible to do a grammatical study. Like there's a cohesive grammar there.
Yes, there is, and it's a grammar that's not identical with any of the other dialects, although it's similar to them in many ways. So it's what working on that, I discovered that I had to know a number of different dialects. So I wound up coming out the other end with a much greater knowledge of the range of Aramaic than I previously had. So it was a good preparation for work on the lexicon project, which was my next step.
Yes. Now, as for the relationship between Pseudo-Jonathan and the other Targums, do you have anything you can share on that?
Well, it's in the past it was called one of the Palestinian Targums. So it's been included, such as the Targum Neophiti and the Fragment Targum and Cairo Geniza fragments are all witnesses to a particular Targum called the Palestinian Targum, which is separate from the so-called Babylonian Targums like Onkelos or Targum Jonathan. And Pseudo-Jonathan seems to have taken some of its texts from that tradition, but it has a lot of unique elements as well as having been influenced by Targum Onkelos. So that's what made people think of it as kind of a mishmash of a Targum. But so it did use those sources, but it shaped them in its own original way.
Okay, well, that's a fascinating area that we may go into on Daily Dose of Aramaic here in the future. Well, so moving on from the Targum specifically, how about could you share with us about what led you to write your recently published Aramaic Grammar? And for those viewers who are not yet familiar with it, although of course we've brought it up on Daily Dose of Aramaic before, could you explain its teaching approach and its contribution to Aramaic studies as a whole?
Well, I heard through the grapevine, as one does, that Cambridge was looking for someone to write an Aramaic grammar, so I wrote to them with a proposal, which was accepted, and so that's how that came about. But my approach is basically inductive, because a lot of the people who want to know biblical Aramaic they just want to know biblical Aramaic. They might not necessarily want to to go beyond that. And even if they do, they want to start with Biblical Aramaic because they're interested in the canonical books and they want to be able to read the Aramaic portions of the Bible. So my my belief was that if that's what you want to read, then let's just read it. Let's just start out with reading it, and we'll pick up the language as we go along. So of course, that can't happen exactly like that, but with a little background, a little comparative background, a few paradigms, some basic vocabulary. My idea was to just launch into reading the text. So the first part of the first 17 chapters of the book are a grammar, a regular grammar of Aramaic, and then the last long chapter is a reading guide to the most of selections from Biblical Aramaic with constant reference back and forth to the grammar, so that people can, if they want to, after they acquire the ability to read the text, read the letters, that they can dive in and with guidance from the grammar, from portions of the grammar, they can start reading the text and pick up the main parts of it, the most important parts of Aramaic as they go along. So that's the ideal. So this inductive approach was something that I had at Fuller. So at Fuller Seminary, William Stanford Lasore was a big fan of the inductive approach, and he had a handbook on Greek and a handbook on Biblical Hebrew, where the same approach was taken. So to learn Hebrew, the first day it was like, okay, we're going to start reading the scroll of Esther, Vayehi. This is a Vav, this is a Yod, and you use the first few verses just to learn the alphabet. And eventually, by the end of the semester, you're cruising along and reading quite fluently in Biblical Hebrew. And so that was my, with some changes, that was my goal with the Aramaic grammar, is to just get people into the text right away with guidance from the grammar.
Wonderful. Well, I really love your book, so I'm thankful that we can have just a few moments to talk about it. So
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. One of your present research concentrations that you brought up is the Semitic background of the New Testament. So a specific question about that, if we may, in your view, what's the significance of the presence of transliterated Aramaic within the Greek of the New Testament? So transcribed words of Aramaic, but then of course put in Greek letters in the New Testament.
Right. Well, some of them are just references to people in places that had Semitic names, so they had to be given in transliterated Hebrew or Aramaic into Greek characters. But the really interesting ones are when Jesus is quoted as using Aramaic in healing or in other contexts. And the gospel writers don't spell out for us why they're doing that. They don't explain why they're giving the exact words. And in those few instances, I think it must have to do with the vividness of the memory of the eyewitnesses or whoever the gospel sources were, that the healing words or the other words that were spoken were impressed the hearers so much that they remembered the exact terms that were used, or Abba used as in the course of his prayer. That must have been something that was frequent to them and became part of the early Christian practice as well. So we can only speculate, but I suspect it was just a vivid historical memory that led to recording those utterances in Aramaic. I wish there was more.
Yes.
obviously, but those few are very valuable.
Yes. So Psalm 22 being referred to from the cross, what we have before us looks like Aramaic rather than Hebrew, as we now, so many centuries apart from that, might have expected Hebrew being the original language.
Right.
What would you see as the, sort of significance of having a vocalization of it, making sure we know it's Aramaic that's being said?
Well, as you know, there are textual witnesses that actually have the text in Hebrew as well. I think I don't have it right in front of me, but I think the so-called Western text of the New Testament has quotes the text in transliterated Hebrew instead of Aramaic. So there must have been, again, we can only speculate, but there must have been a feeling with some that if he was quoting scripture, he would have quoted it in Hebrew. But to see that it is in Aramaic is probably a combination again of the idea that this was really something that came out of the heart of Jesus, but was also a quotation from scripture, that he was making it his own by using it perhaps in the language that he used for teaching and preaching as well. So
that's very interesting. And at least in my experience, when I bring up Aramaic in the Bible, it's actually more often people think of the Aramaic in the New Testament, if they haven't necessarily studied Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, they'll often think I'm talking about the New Testament, actually. So to kind of revisit the Aramaic that's in the New Testament and ponder its meaning is right. Interesting.
It is very interesting, and it's really shaped a lot of my research. One reason I got into the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum is because it was being thrown around as a text that had been in use, or parts of which had been in use in the first century, and I was skeptical about that, but I wanted to examine that. And then, of course, later on, the interest in Kuman Aramaic was an example of really close to the time of Jesus. So
yes,
the possible use of that in New Testament backgrounds was a powerful motive for getting into those texts really deeply as well.
Do you think, both from maybe a time consideration perspective as well as from grammar, that the Qumran Aramaic is probably closer to the Aramaic of Jesus than the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum?
Well, I think it's closer. Unfortunately, we don't have as much of it as we would like. So so Qumran Aramaic is just a fragment of a language. So we can, there are things in there that are throw intriguing light on the New Testament, but the things that we would really like to know, there's probably not really enough Aramaic there for us to build something out of. So we have to, oh darn, we have to use other texts. So, but that's okay as well.
We have to use all the data that exists.
We have to use all the data that exists. So.
Yeah. Well, good. So, Dr. Cook, thanks so much for your time. As we close, how would you like to encourage our listeners to maintain their knowledge of biblical languages once their formal training in them is complete?
Well, if you're not interested in the language in itself, I guess my suggestion would be to just keep reading a little bit every day with a commentary or a dictionary by your side. Don't make it hard on yourself, make it easy on yourself. But read a lot. If you read a lot, things will sink in with repetition. So that would be my encouragement. So as I say, I'm big on inductive study. So just keep the text in front of you at all times as much as you possibly can, and make it fun for yourself. That's what I would suggest.
Well, and of course, we're all about that here at Daily Dose for our various
Yes,
language versions.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yes.
and kudos to you for doing that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cook. And, on behalf of the viewers, many of whom have been watching for over 2 years now, and, here we are at the end of the Biblical Aramaic Corpus. Thank you for your perspectives here. They're going to be really helpful for us actually moving forward now as we look at other kinds of Aramaic that are tied in with biblical studies beyond the direct connection we have to biblical Aramaic, the Aramaic in the Bible. So thank you once again, sir. It's great to meet you via this interview. And
Great to meet you as well.
Yes,
All right.
appreciate you showing up on Daily Dose of Aramaic.